holding on Daf Memches Amud Aleph, page 48a, and let's see, the new Gemara that we learned yesterday. We concluded that Gemara, the previous Gemara. Well, the truth is, I guess we went over it already. We're just going to start. Let's just start on the bottom of Mem Zayin Amud Beis. We'll just start here at the Tanya Kavasei Rav Nachman. We've just concluded in the previous Gemara that the halacha is that you do say Zman on Shmini Atzeres. At Shmini Atzeres, you have to say the bracha of Zman. Another name for that is Shehachiyanu. The Gemara calls it the bracha of Zman, but we know it as the bracha of Shehachiyanu. That bracha you say on Shmini Atzeres. And as we've been seeing, it's Regel B'fnei Atzmayu. It is considered a holiday in its own right, and it gets a Shehachiyanu. And Rav Nachman said this, and the Gemara concludes Hilchasa, that we say it, Aimim Zman, and we learned it earlier that Rabbi Yochanan had made the official statement that you say Shehachiyanu on Shmini Atzeres, but you don't say Shehachiyanu on Shvi Shal Pesach. Anyway, the Gemara here concludes that this is correct, that you do say Shehachiyanu on Shmini Atzeres, as Rabbi Yochanan said, as Rav Nachman said. And the Gemara says Hilchasa, that's the halacha. Now the Gemara brings a brisa. Tanya Gavasei Rav Nachman. Now I'm going to learn it inside. So we're in the bottom line on page 47b. This is a brisa that goes according to Rav Nachman. Shmini regel b'fnei atzmai. Shmini is the 8th day, which means Shmini Atzeres is a holiday of its own right. We are now on page 48a. Regel b'fnei atzmai. It's a holiday in its own right. Le'inyan Pizar Kshav. Regarding Pizar Kshav, which is 6 types of things that are applicable for that make this regel, that make this a Yom Tov in its own right, make Shmini Atzeres a Yom Tov, because these 6 things are areas where being a holiday in its own right gives it an applicable. It becomes applicable that if it's a holiday in its own right, regarding these 6 matters, these 6 matters, these 6 items would make a difference if it's a regel b'fnei atzma, if it's a holiday in its own right, or not, or if it's a continuation of Sukkot. The first one is the way is called pious, the pay. That's for the pay, and that's a pious b'fnei atzma, and this pious, this type of they would make some type of a lottery. Where they would figure out the people who are getting the merits, the zchusim, the merits of the mitzvah. So the pious, the way Rashi learns it is that they during Sukkot they actually did not do the pious, the lottery to figure out who gets which mishmar is going to get the merit of doing the parim, the bulls of the Yom Tov. And let's just read Rashi inside. It's the top line. Pious b'fnei atmei shebachol parei hachag. For all the bulls of the holiday, lo yahayu matilin pious. They would not do a raffle, lottery. Eza mishmar Yaakov. Which mishmar should be merit to bring the bulls? So what did they do? They gave each mishmar a chance. The only thing is, there's 24 mishmaros and there's only 13 bulls. So how did they work it out? So Rashi says, and this is, of course, we're going to come to it later. It's page 55. We're going to be learning this. But anyway, let's just see what Rashi, the way Rashi explains it. So the seder that Levi seder hayim akrivan, they would do it in the order that. There's an order to all the mishmaros. Each mishmar had a set. This is the first one. That's the second one, and they had an order to them. Who went first? Who went second? So they would. So that's how they would. They wouldn't do the pious. They wouldn't do this raffle to see who's going to be able to, which mishmar, which of the watchings is going to be able to bring the bulls of the holiday. Instead, they did it with the regular Seder, the order that was there, that was established. And what ended up happening was the first 13 got to do it on the first day of Sukkot, and they brought the bulls. And now, who missed out? Number 14 through 24. Those mishmaros, those groups of kayanim. Again, the kayanim were divided into 24 groups called mishmaros, and there were only 13 bulls on the first day, and you have 24 mishmaros. So that order was the order that we went by, and we gave the first 13 out of the 24. In that order, the order of the 24 that they're established to do their watchings, that's who we gave the parim to for the first day. Each one got one par, one bull. And then the next day was the mishmaros that missed out, which is the 14th until with another 12. So you got the 14th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20, 21, 22, 23. One second. Let me start again. The 14th Mishmar, there were 12 parim, 12 bulls on the second day. So you have the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. There was enough if there were 25 mishmaros, each one would now finally have brought a bull, because the first day was the first 13. The second day was the next 12. The only thing is there were not 12. There were not altogether 25. There were only 24 mishmaros. So now we went back to the first group. Now the first one brought on the second day as well. So he brought twice. And then what do we do on the third day? We start with the second group, the second mishmar. They brought 11. So in other words, they brought the first of the 11, and then mishmar number 2, mishmar number 3, mishmar number 4. Altogether, there were 11, and so on and so forth. We let some of them double and triple. And now that's what Rashi says, that ad shekol chaf dalid mishmaris, we're in Rashi, the third line, the top Rashi, in the third line, it says, until all 24 mishmaris, shoinais, had brought bulls twice, umeshalshois, and even a third time, because we kept the order going, and when we finished, every mishmar got one bull, and then when they all got, we went back to mishmar number 1 to go again, and then mishmar number 24, and they finally went, all of them went a second time, and then came the third time around, and mishmar, except 2 of them did not get to do it a third time around. $24 times 3.
That's correct, Rabbi.
24 times 3 is 72. 72. And there were 70 bulls. So if there's only 70 bulls, so all of the mishmaros were able to do it 3 times except 2 of them. Right. 70. Okay. So 2 of them only got to do it twice, 2 mishmaros, and all the others got to do it 3 times. So Mishoinais is twice, so Mishalshois, and the third time, Chutz Mishtayim, except 2 Kedamim Ba'Cholil, that we say in the chapter HaCholil. Now, Par Deshmini, B'Tchilo Mefaisenolo. Now, the 8th, the par, the bull that was brought on the 8th day, that was a whole different category, and that they would make a lottery to see which mishmar merited to bring that par, which of the watchings merited to bring that bull. So what Rashi is saying is it didn't fall into the rules of the Chag. Now, you have to keep in mind, when we think about the Korbanos and the way it was brought with the Mishmaros, with all the watchings, the way it was done is that for a holiday was different than the regular sacrifices. There were daily and weekly sacrifices that were brought. That was the local, the regular Mishmar. And they still were doing the service for the daily sacrifices. But during the holidays, we let every mishmar participate. And that's why this discussion comes about, that on Sukkot, every mishmar had a chance to bring one of the bulls, and a second one, and even a third. Most of them were able to bring. Now, but Shmini Atzeres did not follow that order. They made a raffle to see which mishmar gets to bring, not the mishmar of that week, that because it's a holiday sacrifice. Shmini Atzeres is a holiday sacrifice. The question is it part of the do we follow the Sukkot mechanism of doing it, or is it like a holiday in its own right, and we're going to do a pious for it? So it has a pious bifnei atzmai. And the second thing is man bifnei atzmai, which is the way we explained that it's the bracha of Shechiyanu. It has its own Shechiyanu, and that this is the proof to Rav Nachman, to the halacha follows like Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan, that you say a Shechiyanu because it has his man bifnei atzmai. Then it's called a regel bifnei atzmai. Now, regel bifnei atzmai is a topic of discussion among the commentaries. Regel bifnei atzmai, because Rashi says it means that you don't dwell in the sukkah. It's a holiday in its own right. That, at least in Eretz Yisrael, you wouldn't dwell in the sukkah, and that's what it means. It's a holiday in its own right. That Shmini Atzeres is not part of Sukkot because you don't dwell in the sukkah. There's other commentaries add on that you also don't shake lulav, and then Tosfos says that regel b'fnei atzma. He brings two other interpretations. Rabbeinu Tam explains that it means that you need to stay overnight. Lina, that's a regel b'fnei atzma, that Shmini Atzeres, you need to stay overnight, which was something we talked about a little before with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Do you stay overnight? It's a one-day holiday, and we see he says you do. But basically, that this is the statement here that it's a regel b'fnei atzma. You have to stay overnight, and the Rabbeinu Hananel Tosfos brings says that it means that if there's a person whose relative passes away before Yom Tov, it knocks off the rules of mourning. So, for example, someone passed away before Sukkot, then Sukkot knocks away Shiva. Then comes Shmini Atzeres, and it knocks away the Shloshim rules, the laws of the 30-day mourning. So there's the 7-day mourning and the 30-day mourning. So a person's relative passed away before Sukkot, he's really going to be, his Shiva, his mourning is minimized to a great extent. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, this thing with the pious for the 70 bulls, is that a bit like the pious for the Shivim Ziknei Yisrael, where without it, 10 of the Shvatim would have had 6 representatives, and the other 2 had 5, so they had to have a pious.
That is very interesting, because you're saying it actually was 72. It ended up being 72. Right. Very interesting. 6 times 12 is 72. It's exactly like it. Yeah, that's interesting. The only thing is that, why were there 7? What was we have to look into the mystical meaning behind why were there 70 Zakanim? What's the concept of 70? Does that also correspond to the Umay Sa'ilam, the nations of the world? And that's
that was the intent.
What is that?
That was the intent.
The intent of the Purim of the bulls, or the intent of the Sanhedrin, of the 70 Zakanim, the 70 elders? Which one are you referring to? Because
the bulls were the nations.
The bulls refers to the nations, yeah. So Mordechai is bringing in if he wants to know if it's the same idea of having 70 Zakanim, 70 elders, and there really were 72, but 2 were basically excluded. And the question was, that is exactly like the Purim, like the bulls. The bulls, there were 72 Shvat. There were, if you go 3 times around the Shvatim, it's 72, and but the bulls, there were only 70. So you have a similar thing where 2 get left out. So I was wondering. So the thing is that I don't know that the Shivim Zakanim correspond to the 70 nations. You know what I mean? If the Shivim Zakanim correspond to the 70 nations, then it would be very similar. I don't know that
weren't there 72, but 2 decided to exclude themselves. They
No,
include.
no, that two lost out. Two lost out. That, of course, there's Eldad and Medad, the whole discussion there, but two were not eligible to be part of it. They were
Well,
not. They were not.
the members of the Sanhedrin had to know the 70 languages, right?
70 languages. Uh-huh.
Right.
So you could say maybe it's about elevating the 70. Interesting. They had to like elevate the all the languages by knowing all the languages. They were refining them, bringing righteousness, judgment, righteous justice into the nations. Interesting. It's an interesting observation. Thank you, Mordechai, for bringing it up. But I can't really say I know a clear connection. But that's definitely an interesting that the numbers match. Okay. Because Ezra, what I wanted to tell you was the way Moshe Rabbeinu did the raffle, he did 70 that said Zakein, 70 pieces of like you put 70 papers that said Zakein, and 2 were blank. And so there were 72. Each Shevet gave six people who they chose to be elders, and 2 of them ended up with a blank one, and that was and so there were only 70 that were accepted. Now, so we have here so far Pei Zayin Reish Regel B'fnei Atzmai. We just explained a few pshatim, a few meanings behind what it means. It's a Regel B'fnei Atzmai. That Shmini Atzeres is a holiday in its own right, because it's quite vague. And then we said it's a korban. It has a korban b'fnei atzmai, which basically means that you don't do continue the number of bulls from the holiday of Sukkot, but rather it's a korban b'fnei atzmai. It has a number of its own. It doesn't follow the symmetry of the holiday of Sukkot and the way the holiday of Sukkot, the way the bulls were, the order of the bulls. Because according to, if it would be 6 bulls. And then comes the next thing, that it's a shira b'fnei atzmai, that it had a different song for the Levium to sing, and the special song that the Levium would sang during the Sukkot sacrifices, and the Pesach, the Shmini Atzeres is different. And bracha b'fnei atzmai, the bracha that it gets a bracha of its in its own right. And what does that mean? That you mentioned the Yom Shmini Atzeres Hachag Hazeh. You mentioned that it's specifically, you specify that it's the holiday of the 8th day, not the holiday of Sukkot. Now, Rashi does bring another point here. Rashi says that like a different alternative pshat, what it means that it gets a bracha, and this would be the final letter Kzar Kshav, that the base of Kshav refers to bracha, that it doesn't refer to the bracha of that you call it you give it its specific holiday name, rather that it's referring to giving a bracha to the king, that the bracha b'fnei atzmai, that on the 8th day he says that you're supposed to bless the king, and so it gets that's like it has a special uniqueness to it, that it has a bracha b'fnei atzmai, that it brings the Tosefta mashma shemavarchen as hamelach. They bless the king and bring a sword from Malachim. The Hachi Garsina ba bracha b'fnei atzmai shenemar b'yom hashmini shalach es ha'am vayivarchu as hamelach. He sent the nation home and they blessed the king. And so there's an inyan, a concept of blessing the king on Shmini Atzeres. It's interesting that Rashi brings that like this. It definitely sounds surprising that there would be a concept of blessing just because they did it in Shlomo HaMelech's day when they had inaugurated the Beis Hamikdash, the first Beis Hamikdash. Does that mean that Shmini Atzeres every year they would bless the king? It's an interesting pshat from the Tosefta. Just looking to see if anyone talks about it, but I don't see anything. Yeah, they ask this question. They say the Ritva asked it. Iyar asks. We don't find it by other holidays. So it seems to be a question on this pshat that Bhakti brings, like the Tosefta. Why would we think that you would bless the king if you don't do it on the other holidays? Unless the pshat is that you would. We see it from, maybe Rashi understands that you would do it on all the holidays. That's he said they bring down that the Meiri brings down that according to this pshat, you would bless the king on all the holidays. But the Meiri asks, he says, it doesn't seem like this is true. And to connect that story with the kind of mitzvah of Yom Tov. Interesting Rashi that he brings this pshat. But Taisus Rabbeinu Peretz says a very interesting thing. He says that this is a hint to our minhag that on Simchas Torah we do Chasen Torah and Chasen Bereshis, and we give them great brachas because they're the ones who are chosen from the community, and therefore they get we do this bracha. It's a regel b'fnei atzmai. They get a bracha b'fnei atzmai. Wow, that adds a whole new meaning to the blessings that we do in the if you're a gabbai, you have to say that whole paragraph. So they have a whole long drasha that they read on Simchas Torah, and in Eretz Yisrael it's on Shmini Atzeres. It gets a bracha b'fnei atzmai. They bless the melech, which basically is a sort of a source for blessing the Chasen Torah and Chasen Bereshis. That we give them this whole bracha. It's a holiday of its own right. That you make a whole bracha for the king, just like they did for the melech and by Shlomo HaMelech. It's an interesting shot. I have to see if anyone brings it in the minhagim, like a source. But Taisus Rabbeinu Peretz here says that's a smach to our that it refers to what he says. Smach to the source. Maybe B'Shem Taisus Shan says smach l'minhagenu bring. That's a smach, a source for our minhag to bless. Now we have a new understanding of blessing. That it's a Shmini Atzeres. The Brisa says it's a bracha b'fnei atzmai, and that's expressed in the way the Gabbai blesses the Chasen Torah, Chasen Bereshis. All right, very nice. Okay, now comes the next. I did want to mention one thing, and that is that we're now during Sfiras Omer. The famous question is, why don't we say Shachiyanu on Sfiras Omer? So I just wanted to say there is a vart that I heard, B'Shem Reb Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, J.B. Soloveitchik, about not saying Shachiyanu on Sfiras Omer, because the whole concept of Sfiras Omer is sort of the opposite of Shachiyanu. Shachiyanu means I've lived up to this great time, this great moment, and I want to thank Hashem for giving me life. And the concept of Sfiras Omer is that you're counting to when the great moment is Shavuos. So if you're saying that it's not the great moment yet, so it doesn't make sense to say Shachiyanu, thank you Hashem for letting me live to this great moment, because the whole inyan, the whole essence of Sfiras Omer is the opposite of Shachiyanu. It's a nice answer. Why not? Why we don't say Shachiyanu? Okay, we're up to the Mishnah on page Memches Amud Aleph, the first Mishnah. On page 48a, the Mishnah says a Hallel ve'asimcha shvaina, that the Hallel and the Simcha is for 8 days. And the Mishnah explains it. Actually, the previous Mishnah mentioned, and now the Mishnah explains it. Kate said, how is this so? In what sense is this? So basically, it teaches that a person is obligated to say the entire Hallel on all 8 days, and in eating the Shalmei Simcha on all 8 days. And at least in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, there was a mitzvah, Ein Simcha Basar, you had to bring shlamim, carbon shlamim. This was called Shalmei Simcha, and it says B'samachta b'chagecha, and so we understand that there's a mitzvah of Simcha, eating the Shalmei Simcha on all 8 days. Now, and regarding the last day, honoring the last day of Yom Tov, of Sukkot, which means Shmini Atzeres, Kishar Kol Yemois HaChag, like all the other days of the holiday of Sukkot. Now, what this means is that you're obligated in Hallel and in Simcha and in Kavod Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag. You're obligated in all of these all of these things on all the days of Sukkot, even the last day, Shmini Atzeres. Now, there is a question if this means, is this a third thing? Is it a third thing in honoring the last day of Sukkot like the other days? Is that a third entity? Or is Kavod Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag that it's really, it's explaining that Hallel and Simcha are both elements of this Kavod Yom Tov Ha'achron, that we see that Yechayev and Hallel and Simcha, and which is basically the kavod, honoring the last day of Sukkot with like all the other days. In other words, it's really summarizing what is the obligation on Shmini Atzeres is just like the other holidays. It has the same kavod. You have to do Hallel, you have to do Simcha. So there is such an understanding that it's really not a third entity. And it's really just explaining the other two, or summarizing the other two, that in this kavod of Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, it's like all the other days of the Chag. And it's not really a third entity. Or the other way of learning would be that Yechayev and Hallel and Simcha, and in honoring the Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, like all the other days of Sukkot. But the question would be, so what exactly is that adding to this? What would you be adding by saying that it's your chayev and kavod of Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag? Like what would we think? What's missing out? What does the Mishnah need to tell us? What practical application does that halacha have? So I think that's why the Rif and the Rosh, the way they have it is their girsa actually. As the way our Gemara read, the way in our Gemara the Mishnah has it is Uba kavod Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag Malamed that Yechayev and Hallel Simcha and kavod Yom Tov Shel Chag. It actually sounds like a third thing, but according to the Girsa of the Rosh and the Rif, the way they have it is Malamed Shechayev v'kavod Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, like all the other days. It doesn't repeat Hallel and Simcha. It only says Hallel and Simcha in the beginning of the Mishnah. It says that's 8 days, and then Melame that you're machabed Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, like all the other days of Sukkot, that it gets the Hallel and Simcha. Well, these are the inyan of kavod of Yom Tov, the Hallel and the Simcha. Go eating in the Sukkah and shaking little, that's not part of the kavod of Yom Tov. Hallel and Simcha, that's part of the kavod. So it teaches us that Yechayev and the kavod of Yom Tov. So according to their Gersa, it actually is very understandable because we're not adding a third thing. So it's a little questionable. So what is the Mishnah really adding? According to our Gersa, so the way our Gemara has it, it is a little unclear. What is what is being added with this kavod Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, that you're now obligated in Yom Tov Ha'achron just like the other days. We're lifting it up. What more than Hallel, the full Hallel, and the concept of Simcha, that you're sameach with the shlamim of Simcha, eating the Shalmei Simcha. What more to the kavod? How else would you be machabed? I mean, the fact that it has mitzvahs of Kiddush and Yom Tov, I don't know if the Mishnah needs to tell us that. We know it. It's a Mikrei Kodesh. It's in this week's parsha, right? It's called. These are the holidays. So what more? What would the Mishnah be adding? So that the girsa of the rush and the riff actually makes it much more smooth. I don't know if any of you have any. I don't know, David, if your Gemara has any explanation, adds anything to that. But anyway, that's the Mishnah. It talks about Hallel, Simcha, and which seem to be all included in the covet of Yom Tov Achron. Okay, the Gemara now asks, how do we know that the concept of Simcha is going to apply on Shmini Atzeres? How do we know these words? How do we know that this is the halacha, that the mitzvah of Simcha applies even on Shmini Atzeres? So the Gemara says, this is what the way Rashi understands the question, Shmini Chayev B'Simcha. How do you know that? And he says, because it doesn't say clearly that Simcha, it only says, Chag HaSukkos Tasalcha Shivas Yamim V'Samachta B'Chagecha. It sounds like it's only 7 days Simcha. So where do we know that this Simcha is going to be? In other words, the Mishnah said two things, said Hallel and Simcha. But the Gemara's question is only on the Simcha. How do you know that the Simcha applies to the Shmini Atzeres, the Tana Rabbanan? So the Gemara says, because we learned it in a brisa, that the rabbis taught in a brisa, we have an extra pasuk because the pasuk really already said the inyan of Simcha, mentioned it already, and now it then again repeats it and says V'yisach Sameach. It says V'samachta b'chagecha already. So what's V'yisach Sameach? It says it twice. So rather it means the rabbis leili Yom Tov Achron, that it includes. There must be another day that it applies to. Okay, we're going to apply it to the night of Shmini Atzeres. And we'll say that not only is have Simcha on the 7 days of Sukkot, but you'll also have Simcha on the night of Shmini Atzeres. And once you add the night of Shmini Atzeres, it's a kal v'chomer that you'll be mesameach by day as well. We saw that in Rashi. Maybe we'll read Rashi one more time. The rabbis leili Yom Tov Achron, the Simcha Shalafonov, that includes the night of Yom Tov, the last night of Yom Tov, to the Simcha that's before it. This is Rashi on page 48a. The rabbis, Rashi, which must be about let's say about 25 lines from the top. The rabbis leili Yom Tov Achron, for the Simcha to before it. The Kailulayim Shivas Hayamim, to include it with the other 7 days. It's Sheyizbach Shevishlamim B'Shviyi Kadei Lachol El Shmini, that you're going to be slaughtering. You can't slaughter at night. So obviously means that you slaughter on the day of the seventh day, to eat it on the 8th day. 7 days Chol Hamoed. You'd slaughter it on the 7th day, to eat it on the 8th, the night of the 8th. And that's the Mitzvah Sameach Lamai also. What's this Simcha Ach Sameach? Even the Chsiv Lo El Minei V'Samachta B'Chagecha, it already says you're supposed to be Mesameach on Yom Tov B'Chagecha, which is on Yom Tov. So what does it mean that you would be? What would be the concept of the Simcha on, again, to say Simcha a second time? So since it was already included, El Rabbi Simcha Shal Lel Shmini, it must be including the night of the 8th, because that wasn't part of the pasuk. The pasuk says V'samachta b'chagecha. So then the Gemara, then Rashi adds on V'kivan des Rabbi Leili Yom Tov Achron Shutafel. Since it's including the night, the last night, for sure the day Shu Iker, which is the main thing, because it's the Iker Shachayev B'Simcha, the day which is the Iker, which is the main thing that would be Chayev and Simcha. And the other days we don't need to add and say, oh, it's only the nights are part of the mitzvah of Simcha. Now we need a pasuk to teach me the days. No, that you don't need, because the other days of Sukkot, the nights and the days, it's all included. It includes, the other nights you don't need a pasuk for. I don't know if I said the word day. The other nights, Rashi says, Shara leilos leitzrichi riboy the yamim afilo leilos b'mashma. It doesn't have to add the other nights of, so we have to add the last night, but we don't have to add the nights during the 7 days, because those nights are all included in the words of the pasuk that for 7 days. Shivas Yamim. Yam doesn't specifically mean days. It means doesn't only mean day versus night. It means day, the 24-hour days. which includes the night. And like we include that sukkah you have to dwell in the sukkah also at night, because the 7 days doesn't mean daytime, the 12-hour days, it means the 24-hour days. And when do we need Yom Tov Achroin? What do we, when we need the Yitzchok, Yom Tov Achroin, when do we need to add? When do we need to add something to Simcha? Not the nights during the 7 days, because that's included when it says the mitzvah of V'samachta b'chagecha. After it says that 7 days, it says you should be joyous, and those 7 days are 24-hour days. That means all 7 days are included already. So what would be added with the V'hayisa ach sameach to add on another concept of Simcha? Where would that apply to? It's l'leila yom tov ha'achrein. It's for the last night of the 8th of the Shmini Atzeres. That's what it's needed for. It's not included in the 7 days. And for sure, it has to include the night, because that's what's close to the 7 days of the pasuk. And the day would be concluded from a kavachim, and then which basically it's teaching us that you should eat the sacrifice, the peace offerings that were brought during the holiday of Sukkot. You should rejoice with them on the night of the 8th day, because you are not able to bring a korban at night. Must mean that it's included that even though you slaughtered by day, but you should be eating that meat at night. There's a mitzvah of simcha at night. Now the Gemara says, maybe you should be including that the first night should have simcha, because the first night there's a little problem. First night, there's no korban to eat. On the night of the 8th day, the night before the 8th day, that night, you have sacrifices that you brought during the holiday that you could eat that night. As long as it's within 2 days. Shlam is eaten 2 days in one night. So you would be allowed to eat it. Anything that was brought on the 7th day would be allowed to be eaten on the night of the 8th and on the day of the 8th, so you could fulfill the mitzvah of Shalmei Simcha. But the Gemara says, the first night of Sukkot, there's no Shalmei Simcha. So there's no mitzvah of Simcha on the first night of Sukkot. And if so, you don't have a mitzvah of Simcha because you can't slaughter then. The Gemara says, well, maybe you're supposed to slaughter on Erev Yom Tov before Yom Tov begins. Slaughter a Shalmei Simcha, and you'll be able to rejoice that night. Maybe that's what it's saying. You should be b'sameach even the night before Sukkot, the first night of Sukkot, I should say. Even that night, even though, of course, there's no korban that you were of Shalmei Simcha yet, but no, you maybe have to make a korban on Erev Yom Tov. Bring a korban, shlamim, and that korban will be used for the night to be b'sameach. So the Gemara says, when it says the word ach is always excluding something. So it's going to exclude Lel Yom Tov Arisha in the night of the first day of Sukkot from Simcha. That ach excludes something. And so therefore, we're going to exclude the first night. You don't bring a korban on Erev Sukkot and then eat it that night, but you will eat meat on Shmini Atzeres night, the meat that was sacrificed on the 7th day of Sukkot. The Gemara says, so why are you choosing to exclude this and include that? You're excluding the first night, but you're including the night before the 8th day. That night you're including and saying, I have to have a simcha now that night. Who told you to exclude the first night and add the 8th night? Maybe add the first night and exclude the 8th night. And especially because it's a different holiday, right? So the Gemara says, who told you to add the last night of Sukkot, which means the night of Shmini Atzeres, add that for the mitzvah of Simcha. And exclude the first night. Who told you to do it this way? Marba. The Gemara answers, Marbani Leile Yom Tov Achroin. I'm going to include the last night. Shekain Yesh Simcha Lefanav. There is Simcha before it, and during the 7 days of Sukkot, you have Simcha. So there's Simcha before it, and I'm going to exclude the first night. she'ein simcha lefanav, there's no simcha before it, and we should therefore include specifically the last night rather than the first night. The commentaries add, well, Rashi, the last Rashi says, you don't need to have the slaughtering at the time of Simcha, and therefore maybe it means maybe you'd have to slaughter on Erev Yom Tov. And the Gemara answers that it's not that it's not so. Instead, you have a mitzvah only on the last night, but not on the first night. And the reason is because you don't have the first night, you don't have simcha before it, and the last night you have simcha before it. The question is, what about? You could really question this, because the first night you have simcha after it, and the last night maybe you don't have simcha after it. So so maybe you could argue on the Gemara's answer and question the Gemara's answer. Not argue, you can't argue on the Gemara's answer, but you can question the Gemara's answer. You could say it would seem that maybe this is maybe I should add the first night. Who says you're supposed to look at the simcha before it? Maybe we should be looking at the simcha after it. So first of all, it's not really a question, because what Rashi is really the way Rashi explained it is that both days have simcha after it. Both days you're going to have simcha right after it. According to the first day is the first night, you're going to have simcha the next day, shalmei simcha, and the 8th night you would have simcha. If you bring it that night, you'll have simcha the day after it, because it's a kal v'chomer from the night, as Rashi told us. So both have simcha after it. It's only a question of before it, which one has simcha, and because the Shmini Atzeres has simcha before it, therefore it would make sense to be marbe to include the last night versus the first night. So that's what it would seem to be the answer. Another thought that comes to my mind, and I didn't see this anywhere, is that the first night, you don't have a korban to be mesameach with, to rejoice over. You didn't bring a korban on Erev Sukkot. You don't have a korban to rejoice with. The Gemara's question was, well, maybe we should say that you're obligated to bring a korban. The Gemara's answer possibly is that the last night you have korbanos that were brought on the 7th day, and they could be brought, and they should be brought. It's the time to bring shalmei simcha, so it makes sense to eat them on the night of the 8th. In other words, you have simcha, meaning you have the korban simcha. It's the shalmei simcha. It's not just the mitzvah of simcha. You have the shalmei simcha. Maybe that's what the Gemara means. I'm going to include the last night, because there's shalmei simcha there for me to eat. It makes sense that I should be rejoicing. I have shalmei simcha still. I have it from the 7th day korbanos. I'm going to exclude the first night because it doesn't clearly say that there's simcha before it. Again, Rashi doesn't explain these words of the Gemara. That's why it would seem that you could maybe understand the Gemara this way. In any event, it's the Gemara. The Gemara flows. You could learn it either way. That you're including that both of them have simcha afterwards. It's the question is which one has simcha before it, and we just have And the answer is that the last night has simcha before it. We're going to include the last night because it has simcha, because there's simcha before it, rather than include the first night that doesn't have simcha before it. So the question is there a mitzvah to be mesameach, the simchas Yom Tov, on the first night of Yom Tov? There's no Shalmei Simcha. So would you have a mitzvah of simcha? So the problem is, our Gemara sounds like there's no mitzvah of simcha on the first night of Yom Tov. Right? That's what it seems to be saying. But Yisach Sameach tells you the night of the 8th night, and it implies like maybe there's no mitzvah of simcha. I mean, during the day you have a mitzvah of simcha, sure. But the night before, you don't have the mitzvah of simcha. Simcha's, it's connected to the Shalmei Simcha. It seemed like there's no. The problem is that on Pesach, the Gemara says that if you drank all 4 cups of wine in one shot, what happens? You weren't yaitza the mitzvah of daled kaisis because you drank them, not in the order. You just drank them all one after another. But so it says, Yedei yayin yatza, Yedei arba kaisis lo yatza. You fulfilled the mitzvah of wine. What's a mitzvah of wine? So the commentaries explain over there that it means you did fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. Sounds like there is a mitzvah of Simcha on the first night of Yom Tov. That's talking about Pesach. Here we're talking about Sukkot. But it would seem that the concept of Simcha applies to all the Yom Tovim. And if it applies to one Yom Tov the first night, it would seemingly apply to the other Yom Tovim as well. So why would the mitzvah of why does our Gemara say there's no mitzvah of simcha if we say in the other Gemara that there is a mitzvah of simcha? So the Shagas Aryeh asks this question. He says, you know what? Our Gemara is saying midaraisa, bringing that midaraisa there's no mitzvah of simcha, but rabbinically there is a mitzvah of simcha, and that's what the Gemara there is talking. That's the way the Shagas Aryeh learns, that there's a difference. There's a mitzvah of simcha. Based on the rabbinic law, we do have a mitzvah of simcha on Yom Tov, but biblically, you don't have a mitzvah of simcha, and that's what our Gemara is emphasizing. The Gemara there is talking about the mitzvah of daled kaisis, which is anyway d'rabbanan. It's a rabbinic law to have daled kaisis, and it's also d'rabbanan to have simcha. That you yaitza when you have the 4 cups of wine in one shot, you fulfill the mitzvah of wine, the mitzvah of having simcha.